Earthquakes are some of the most devastating forces on Earth, capable of leveling cities, triggering landslides, and creating tsunamis. Some leave gigantic fissures in their wake, huge ruptures in the Earth's surface showing just how much a tectonic plate shifted at the fault line. But which of these are the biggest? And just how big can they get? Come with me as we take a look at some of the biggest earthquake faults in the world. Now, first things first, we need to know what a fault line actually is. Well, they're long fractures in the earth that cause earthquakes when rock suddenly moves and shifts. This motion is caused when stresses build up in the earth from the movement of tectonic plates. And tectonic plates themselves are broken pieces of the earth's crust and mantle that are constantly moving, and fault lines mark the boundaries on which they meet each other. That seems pretty simple, except there are also three types of boundary. Convergent boundaries occur when plates move towards each other and collide. A divergent boundary means that plates are moving away from one another, and a transform boundary occurs when plates move alongside each other. As a result, this buildup of friction can cause the tiniest ground tremors or the deadliest catastrophic quakes. So then, which are the worst fault lines at, well, fault? If you like adventure and action movies as much as I do, you might have seen the disaster film San Andreas with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. It centers around a fault line suddenly rupturing, causing a large and lethal earthquake in California that can be felt across the entire country. Well, while the film is pure fiction, the San Andreas is a real fault zone spanning 800 miles from the northern Gulf of California through Western California. But the only rocks in danger here are the ones along the fault line. It sits on the transform boundary between the Pacific and North American plates, the former moving northwest and the latter being pushed southeast. As such, San Andreas is a right lateral strike slip fault. This is a type of fault that occurs when rocks move alongside each other, like this. It will either be right or left lateral depending on which direction the block opposite the fault line has moved. When earthquakes occur, Hollywood has made everyone believe that the rock bursts so violently that it splits apart, creating a huge fissure or chasm. I've watched so many films where the ground seems to swallow everyone up, but unfortunately, folks, it's all just movie magic. Most cracks caused by tremors won't be wider or deeper than a few feet, if that. Since an earthquake requires friction between two blocks of rock in a fault line, a fault could never open up wide enough in the first place. For what it's worth, most fissures aren't directly the result of earthquakes themselves, but of landslides and rough shaking in the ground. God, do your research, Hollywood. Ever been so tired you feel like you could sleep for an entire year? That's me, almost every day. Well, this earthquake fault also likes to sleep, and there's no telling when it'll wake up. Altan is another strike slip fault, but this time motion occurs on the left side. However, this one is even larger, extending for up to 1,000 miles along the Tibetan Plateau and Kunlun Mountains in China. Despite the fault size, it's only believed to have caused 2 or 3 large earthquakes in the last 2,000 to 3,000 years. Yep, it's been lying suspiciously dormant all those years. Does it mean we're due for one soon? Or does it mean it's not a threat? Well, every fault has a slip rate, which measures how fast two sides of rock are slipping relative to one another. Altan's slip rate is 10 millimeters a year, and there is evidence that this has slowed over time. It suggests that increased slip on the neighboring Kunlun fault over the last 100 years may have caused a reduction in Altan's slip. This slower rate, of course, means less movement and less activity. Well, let's hope it stays that way. Just like my pet Rottweiler Prince Fluffy, the Queen Charlotte has a sweet name but exhibits some, well, troubling behavior. In fact, the name is completely ridiculous. There's nothing remotely queenly about this fault. This is another right lateral strike slip fault, extending over 750 miles from Vancouver Island in Canada to southeast Alaska. Like San Andreas, the Queen Charlotte marks the boundary between the Pacific and North American plates. The Pacific Plate is moving northwest at extremely fast speeds of 3 to 4 inches a year. In comparison, the average tectonic plate, like the North American, will only move 0.6 inches a year. Fault lines marking the Pacific Plate can subsequently cause more frequent and more dangerous earthquakes. This is a zone appropriately called the Ring of Fire, responsible for over 80% of the Earth's large earthquakes. As such, the Queen Charlotte's Fault is no stranger to the plate's ferocity. It has produced 5 earthquakes recorded at 7 and above on the Richter scale in the last 100 years. This scale refers to the magnitude of an earthquake, determined by the seismic waves a quake produces, measured by its size, how strong it is, and how much energy is released. In 1958, its full power was unleashed when the Queen Charlotte triggered a 1,700-foot tsunami in Lituya Bay, Alaska. It was the largest recorded tsunami in history. Well, there's no running from that one. This was due to a 7.8 scale earthquake that sent 90 million tons of rock tumbling in a 3,000-foot tall landslide to the bay, prompting this giant wave to ride up over the opposing valley side and then wash over the drop. Only 5 people lost their lives, though the wave destroyed countless homes and injured many others. Well, that's one hell of a way to make a splash. There's no stopping an earthquake when it begins. All you can do is hope it won't cause too much damage. Unfortunately, some faults are just more active than others. One such fault is the Kermadec Tonga. This is an impressive 1,900-mile dip-slip megathrust subduction zone between Samoa Island and New Zealand. Whew, that's a lot of words. Try saying that 10 times faster. But what does this mean? Well, unlike strike-slip faults, a dip-slip fault occurs when rocks slide past each other vertically. Thrust faults are a type of reverse fault which occurs when one block of rock moves upward relative to the opposite block. A thrust fault dips at particularly shallow angles, some 45 degrees or less. But Kermadec Tonga is a megathrust fault. This is a very large thrust fault, commonly found along subduction zones, an area where tectonic plates collide with one another. They can only form in convergent plate boundaries, in which one plate overrides the other and pushes it downward, aka subducting it. In this case, the Pacific Plate is subducted beneath the Indo-Australian Plate. As we've established, the Pacific Plate is incredibly speedy. In fact, it's the fastest moving plate in the world. As a result, Kermadec Tonga is one of the regions with the highest amount of large-scale earthquakes and volcano eruptions in the world. Since 1900, 40 earthquakes with a magnitude of 7.5 and above have been recorded, including the rare double earthquake event in Samoa in 2009. The first earthquake occurred on a normal fault. This is another type of dip-slip fault where the upper block of rock slides downwards. This triggered 2 minor quakes in a thrust movement that together amounted to an enormous 8 on the Richter scale. They occurred within 2 to 3 minutes of each other, causing tsunami waves of over 70 feet. More recently, an underwater volcano near Tonga suddenly erupted in 2022. The explosion was so great, tsunami waves turned up on the doorstep of California after traveling 5,000 miles. Damn, these earthquakes sure do get around. The Himalayas are regarded as one of the most famous mountain ranges around, but what you might not know is that there's a fault line below your feet that could blow you off the mountainside in a second. Yep, the main Himalayan thrust is another mega thrust fault. Over 1,500 miles long, it's the largest of its kind in the world. It marks the boundary between the Eurasian and Indian plates, with the Indian plate moving around 2 inches annually. This is faster than its counterpart, which moves at just ½ inch. This movement is ultimately pushing the Himalayan range higher, about 10 millimeters a year, as the Indian subducts the Eurasian plate. As the peaks keep climbing, even more quakes are making the place shake. This deadly fault caused the 7.3 and 8.1 earthquakes in Nepal in 2015. The latter was so forceful that it triggered an avalanche on Mount Everest. Be wary of this fault, folks. It's making a mess and literally moving mountains. The Enriquillo Plantain Garden sounds like a lovely botanical garden. The perfect place to relax, right? Yeah, no. By the name, you wouldn't think it was a super deadly fault line. This is a left lateral strike-slip fault extending 683 miles from the Cayman Trough to the deepest point in the Caribbean Sea to the Enriquillo Valley in the Dominican Republic. This fault was culprit to one of the deadliest and most memorable earthquakes in recent history, also known as the Haiti disaster. The Plantain Fault caused chaos with a 7-scale earthquake that hit Haiti on January 12, 2010. The Caribbean and North American plates slid past one another and caused enough friction to produce an earthquake, resulting in a death toll between 200 to 300,000. This makes it one of the worst natural disasters in history. It also caused over $7 billion in total value of damage and loss to the country. Then in 2021, another earthquake of the same magnitude hit Haiti on August 14th. Over 137,000 homes were damaged or destroyed, and unfortunately, citizens had to withstand even more tremors. In fact, at least 900 aftershocks were felt after the first initial earthquake. Aftershocks are mini earthquakes that follow the main eruption, and sometimes they're felt years after the main event. Yep, just when you think you've gotten over the first giant eruption, another one comes back to bite you. Now that's one nasty garden. We all know twins can be double the trouble, and fault zones are no different. It can be a nightmare having more than one fault line in the same area, but here's a horror story for you. The Anatolian Fault is not just a large fault line, it's actually composed of two large fault lines. The North Anatolian Fault stretches 900 miles from the Eastern Anatolian Fault in Turkey all the way through to the Aegean Sea. The Eastern Fault sits on the transform boundary between the Arabian and Anatolian plates, whilst the Northern sits on the boundary between the Eurasian and the Anatolian plates. Yep, twice the plates, twice the problems. These two intersecting fault lines have caused disaster multiple times, especially in recent years. The Northern Fault caused the 6.1 scale earthquake in Turkey in 2022. A year later, the Eastern Fault caused the 7.8 earthquake in Turkey and Syria. According to the UN, this earthquake's impact affected over 15 million people. With such an active fault zone, there's no telling when they might strike again. Yet another reminder that the Earth really is alive beneath us. It's hard to wrap your head around how giant and destructive earthquakes can be sometimes. Not only can they change the Earth's landscape, but their impact can also be felt by millions of people at the same time. This is certainly the case with the Sunda megathrust, an extremely large fault spanning 3,300 miles. This is where the Indo-Australian and the Eurasian plates meet, running from Myanmar in Asia and approaching northwestern Australia. And not only is it long, but it's lethal too. In 2004, the megathrust suddenly slipped in a reverse fault, in which the Indian plate subducted underneath the smaller Burma plate. It was the longest section of a ruptured fault line in history at 900 miles long. That's longer than the entire length of California. The result was a devastating tsunami on Boxing Day, with waves that reached from 30 feet up to 100 feet. Waves in deep seas such as the Indian Ocean can move at blindingly fast speeds, around 500 miles per hour, able to cross entire oceans in just one day. Well, it certainly traveled. It was felt as far as South Africa, roughly 5,000 miles away. This is because the quake had an enormous magnitude of 9.1. Its incredible release of energy not only affected 18 different countries, including Thailand, Indonesia, and Sri Lanka, but was so strong it's said to have released the same amount as 23,000 Hiroshima bombs. Even the aftermath proved deadly. Some of its 14 aftershocks were devastating on their own, producing shakes of magnitudes between 5.7 and 7.3 on the Richter scale. Geez, you just can't catch a break from an earthquake. Now let's take a look back at that San Andreas film. Hollywood has also led us to believe that if any fault line was to rupture in California, it would surely be the deadliest of them all. Ha! Wrong. It's actually the little ones you have to look out for. Despite its smaller size at only 74 miles long, the Hayward promises to leave a big impact. In fact, scientists have deemed it the most dangerous fault in America. It extends through the San Francisco Bay Area and even runs through Cali Memorial Stadium's football field. Its last earthquake was over a century ago, causing chaos in the year 1868. But it was one of the most destructive quakes in California's history. But like any force of evil, it's been biding its time. Yep, this savage strike-slip fault is a tectonic time bomb ready to blow up pretty much any minute now. Scientists estimate that there's a 72% chance of one or more earthquakes occurring before 2043. And not just baby quakes either. Eruptions as strong as 6.7 or above. For reference, this is a 6.4 magnitude earthquake that hit California in 2022. Anyone else now feeling nervous? Even worse, there's a 63% chance this disaster will occur before 2036. Because the odds aren't exactly in their favor, the city has undergone some preparations for the doomsday event. For example, Berkeley University's proximity to the fault has meant that they've had to safeguard their buildings. They've built a new concrete foundation below the building with giant underpinnings, which should keep it from collapsing. Stay prepared and you won't get scared, as they say. Japan is well known for its many beautiful mountains and string of volcanoes, but what you might not realize is how many earthquakes it's home to. An incredible 1,500 quakes hit the country every year. This is because it sits on top of 4 tectonic plates. These are the North American, Pacific, Eurasian, and Philippine plates. Marking the largest plates in this zone, the Pacific and North American, is the Japanese Trench. This is an underwater subduction zone over 27,000 feet deep and 500 miles long. Japan's largest recorded earthquake occurred near this trench, where a thrust fault movement suddenly forced the North American plate upwards. This motion caused a tsunami in 2011, with the quake itself hitting a magnitude ranging from 8.9 to 9.1. It was so powerful, it accelerated Earth's spin, effectively shortening the length of the day by 1.8 microseconds. These 130 feet waves swept through the Tohoku region in the northern part of Honshu Island, not only causing damage to its infrastructure, but also the destruction of 3 nuclear reactors at the Fukushima power plant. This released radioactive materials into the air, forcing thousands to evacuate the area. Yeah, in the history of bad luck, this event might just take the cake. Depending on where you live, occasional tremors might feel completely normal to you. You could be sitting down to breakfast and suddenly feel the house slightly shake. I would already be paralyzed with panic. But in Alaska, it's no biggie. This is because the state sits atop the Aleutian Fault, a subduction zone trench that stretches on in an arching chain for 1,800 miles from the Gulf of Alaska to Kamchatka, Russia. Once again, it also marks the boundary in which the Pacific Plate subducts the North American Plate. Now, Japan may have over 1,000 earthquakes a year, but did you know Alaska and the Aleutian Islands have over 40,000? Thankfully, most of these are minor tremors that won't cause too much damage, but the area does see many large earthquakes, with at least one occurring every year. In 2018, Alaska saw a giant magnitude 7 earthquake wreak havoc on the city of Anchorage, causing major fractures in the ground. So why is this area so active in the first place? Well, these plates converge head-on instead of sliding by each other, which means the Aleutian Trench is prone to more frequent and explosive eruptions. It's like accidentally butting heads. That's gonna produce a lot more pain than casually bumping past someone. Well, explosion is exactly what happened in the spring of 1964. Good Friday quickly turned into Bad Friday when the trench caused an enormous 9.2 scale earthquake. The quake ruptured over 400 miles of land. That's as long as the distance between New York and Toronto. It also caused multiple landslides and a giant tsunami along the Gulf of Alaska and the West Coast, traveling all the way to Hawaii. That's gotta be the worst start to Easter in history. Faults are hidden around us everywhere like booby traps, and just like booby traps, there's often a very horrible prize for disturbing it. Well, there's a fault lurking beneath the surface of New Zealand which could spell disaster for its South Island. Its name is the Alpine Fault, extending over 300 miles over the island mountains and marking a subduction zone where the Australian plate is subducted beneath the Pacific. Like the Hayward, scientists also predict a comeback from the long-dormant fault line. Mark your calendars for about 50 years' time. By then, it's likely to have erupted. There's an 82% probability this earthquake would have a reach of 8 and above. To compare how damaging this would be, here's a look at the 6.3 earthquake that shook the city of Christchurch in 2011. Hold on to your hats. Researchers think up to 1,000 times more energy would be released from an Alpine Fault earthquake. Well, that's just great. I'd try to run, but there's nowhere to hide from the Earth. It's a tale as old as time. The young generation takes over the old, and the landscape changes along with it. Just think about how much has changed in the last 100 years. Well, this happens to fault zones too, but over millions. One of these bright, promising youths is Walker Lane. This is a 625-mile fissure, a long crack along the surface of the Earth that intersects with numerous strike-slip and normal faults in California, including the Garlock and San Andreas. It stretches from the Mojave Desert in Southern California through western Nevada and ends up in northeastern California. Although it's not a fault itself, the western end of the Walker Lane is moving half an inch every year due to the stresses building up in the local fault lines. Turns out Walker Lane is much like a baby San Andreas. The latter has been progressing north over 30 million years, eventually coming to mark the Pacific and North American plate boundary. Walker Lane, by comparison, is only 10 million years old and also moving north. Scientists believe that this youthful fissure will one day rise, Game of Thrones style, to usurp the king of the California faults and take its place on the boundary. What this means is that over the next 7 to 8 million years, San Andreas will be pushed further and further out. As a result, California could eventually be shoved offshore. This would make Nevada the new coastline of the West. Imagine Vegas with a beach. They say you should always keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Well, multiple researchers have been keeping close to Cascadia's subduction zone to keep tabs on it. Because when it does erupt, it's sure to leave a very destructive quake in its wake. This fault extends roughly 700 miles from the Cape Mendocino in Northern California to northern Vancouver Island in Canada. The subduction zone is where the Juan de Fuca, Pacific, and Gorda plates all subduct the North American plate. Due to a lack of written records of any previous events, scientists were led to believe that it wasn't capable of producing great monstrous earthquakes. Turns out it's the complete opposite. We now know that Cascadia can produce earthquakes of magnitudes around 8 or 9. The last quake was a tsunami in 1700, which means it will likely erupt again soon. How do we know this? Well, during the 300-year gap, stress has been building between the plates. This is mostly caused by their slow movement. Think of it like a teapot on the stove whose water is bubbling on the surface just before it lets off steam. Evidence suggests that waves will be as high as 40 feet and casualties could exceed 30,000. Thankfully, we haven't been subjected to any mighty acts of nature yet. When a relationship has run its course, it's time for a divorce. This sadly happened to my buddy Eric. Well, the Earth is breaking up too, you know, but with itself. The East African Rift Valley is over 2,000 miles long, stretching from the Red Sea to Mozambique. A rift occurs when tectonic plates move apart, creating deep valleys in the ground. When plates move, magma from the Earth's mantle rises to create a new crust. In this case, the Somalian plate pulls away from the Nubian plate, rifting at just over a quarter inch a year. In Kenya's Rift Valley, for example, locals witnessed a large crack opening in the ground in 2018. This was due to heavy rainfall sweeping away the volcanic ash that had settled there from an old eruption, exposing the fissure. Surprise! The ground below your feet is unstable. Yep, these weaknesses in the terrain repeatedly confirm a shocking truth. Africa is slowly splitting in half. As the plates continue to move apart, these rifts will continue to grow wider until one day they'll break away entirely. You don't have to worry yet though, this won't happen for millions of years. It's only rifting as fast as your toenails grow. Another example of this lies in Pinglu within the province of Shanxi, China. This rift valley is approximately 6 miles in length and up to 330 feet deep, located in the lowest plateau, an area of highland that rises above its surroundings. This block is essentially wind-blown dust from the last ice age, which has solidified. Although it looks as solid as a rock, it can erode very easily. It is just dust after all. Again, water has eroded the rock and left a long fracture in the earth behind, and quite an impressive one at that. Damn, if you fell into this fissure, you might never come back up. If fault lines could win awards, then the Peru-Chile Trench would receive the highest one there is. Not only did it give rise to the largest and strongest earthquake ever recorded, but it's also the longest trench in the world and one of the deepest too. This undersea trench is located in the Pacific Ocean, 100 miles off the coast of Peru and Chile. It has a plunging depth of 26,000 feet and a length of up to 3,700 miles, marking the subduction zone where the Nazca Plate overrides the South American Plate. This record-breaking fault zone caused the most devastating earthquake in Chile back in 1960. It was an unstoppable force with tsunami waves of up to 80 feet and a magnitude of 9.5. As a result, this earthquake was incredibly far-reaching, turning up in Hawaii with 35-foot waves. Even its aftershocks were massive, with 5 of them occurring at magnitudes of 7 and above. But geological faults aren't just the sites of earth-shattering quakes, but other weird and wild phenomenon too. In 2018, a fault in Cusco, Peru, opened up and caused a landslide on the Campanayac hillside. In February of that year, the fault had already increased in length by a mile, with residents of the nearby village noticing the land slowly rising and their buildings slowly sinking. Then in March, the ground suddenly gave way, leaving the earth a giant mess. Well, I guess you could say this event was groundbreaking. There you have it, some of the most dangerous and deadly disasters in the world. Have you ever experienced an earthquake firsthand or seen a fault line up close? Let me know down in the comments below, and thanks for watching.